of a speech-to-speech translation system. It's always this kind of often, the same voice, and it's always very flat tone. Okay. Yes, I could quickly say something about like the challenge of making language models more multilingual, but this is getting already really, really long. So maybe I should just stop.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Koehn, for such an enlightening and engaging lecture today. We have gained a deeper understanding of how machine translation and large models are transforming communication and accessibility across languages. Your exploration of the evolution from statistical methods to neural machine translation approaches provided a clear perspective on the technological advancements driving this field of translation. Your insights into the challenges, such as mismatch and noise, especially when we speak about speech and speech recognition, as well as the opportunities for improvement, were invaluable. Additionally, your discussion on bridging linguistic barriers and enabling global interaction highlights the profound societal impact of this technology in the domain or translation industry. We are truly grateful for the opportunity to learn from your expertise, and we look forward to seeing how you continue your research and contributions will shape the future of machine translation and artificial intelligence. So since we are training future translators who will be translating from English to into other languages, or into Arabic, or from other languages like French and other languages, Spanish, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So this lecture is going to be of great value for our students. So one question, so I'll be asking the first question. So concerning the competition that you mentioned in your lecture,
mm-hmm.
The competition, how did you assign the language or the translation to, was it machine versus human or something like that? So wasn't,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that comes out of academia. So this is something we started 20 years ago when we started building statistical machine translation models, and it was really new. And we basically wanted to have some kind of, some way to more objectively compare different approaches. So the way this is set up is that we collected some text. Usually they were like just very recent news stories originally. And then we hired translation agencies to translate these. So this is in the order of 3,000 sentences, so 60,000 words. So that's kind of what we thought was needed to be to kind of get meaningful results. And then anybody could build systems. You usually provided training data, like all the parallel text and all linked text that's usually trained on, and then people built these systems. We gave them the source sentences for a week for them to run the machine translation system over. They gave us then the 3,000 sentences back. And then we, from the beginning, did human evaluation on that. There's a long discussion how to do human evaluation right too. What we did for a long time was just ranking, like, did you think this translation was better than that translation? And then we basically had all these ranking data, and then we could rank the systems against each other. So it was initially, the goal was to evaluate research systems. And then as a reality check, we always put it in Google Translate. So that's the online B in that chart. And then Microsoft Translate and everything. So just to know if the research systems we build, are they as good as kind of the state of the art? And we were always, as good or even better than that for a long time. And
yeah, based on that evaluation, so we as human translators, the results were very soothing, if so, for us humans. So we still have something, we'll have a role to do in translation. Yeah, so
so that it's very interesting because machines tend to be very literal, but they don't necessarily drop things or insert things. And then, yeah, they don't never make grammar errors or spelling errors, definitely not spelling errors. So there are certain mistakes that just humans do that are different from machines. And they're not necessarily because the humans couldn't do it. It's just they're under time pressure and they try to do it as quickly as possible, and therefore mistakes sneak in. And then you often see, yeah, is that a translator whose where the target language is not their native language? They might not even word things right, like idiomatically, and all these things kind of pop up.
Yeah, one more quick question, and I will give the floor to the attendants to give more questions. So based on your extended experience in the field of translation, so which CAT tool is the most efficient, if we can say, in the field of translation nowadays?
Yeah, I'm not the right person to ask that question. So, so we built this 𝐶 tool 10 years ago, and was based on MateCat. So this is something that Translated is using.
Yeah, we're using that. We're using that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, 𝐶 was kind of built on top of MateCat. So that seems to be popular. So the one that is more similar to our spirit of 𝐶 is there's a company called Lilt that just uses. Originally, they wanted to build basically a tool like 𝐶 and sell it. And then that somehow didn't work out because of the intricacy of the translation industry, how it works, that the translators usually doesn't have a choice about which tool they use. It's whatever translation agency tells them to do. So they only use it internally. So it's still very intriguing that they do that. So Babel also has like their own version. So I more know it from the people who kind of do innovative new things, but I do know that the whole world uses Trados and
yes,
or whatever they call it, and they all complain about it endlessly, but they don't really can do anything about it. But that's yeah, again, I'm not really in the translation industry to that degree.
Yeah. So our first question for today is from Mr. 𝐧𝐥𝐬𝐧𝐞.
Okay, thank you very much for the lecture you have been delivering for, I think, 1 hour and 20 minutes. I have to thank you beyond words. You have said at the outset of the lecture that the more data you have, the more advantage you will have. And I want to know whether future advancements of machine translation will guarantee that machine translation will replace, or let's say outsmart, human translation. And I want to ask you, the question is this: where is human agency when it comes to the advancements of human translation? And another question is, if the data, training data, as you said, is going, let's say, in an excessive way, we are having, let's say, I think one of the models you showed is that 50 million parameters.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I want to know whether there will be in the future a machine translation which is ideology free.
What was the last word? Ideology?
Ideology free.
Ideology free.
Yeah. I mean, it basically mirrors what's in the training data, and the training data that is used is basically just found translations. So you mentioned Europol as one of my early papers. So that was like, I wanted to work on German English because I actually know what I'm doing there. But there was no training data. And then I came across European Parliament and I was like, hey, that's 50 million words of translated text. And it is basically parliamentarians speaking in the parliament, but they kind of talk about general news. So there was actually really good training data for news. So all that mirrors a bit what we have good training data for. So we have very good training data for like formal language, contracts, kind of stuff like that. We have very little training data, for instance, for casual conversations, because that's not typically written down or translated. So for instance, it's always a big challenge to translate social media because people just don't write grammatically at all, and it's just nobody translates it. So there is no training data. So it's different areas. And also, I mean, big thing is like for some languages you have lots of data, for most languages you don't have a lot of data. So it's maybe just a 50 or 100 languages where you actually have enough training data. For a lot of them you don't. And then that comes to dialects and all that. It's much trickier. So another interesting source of data that is actually, I'm not sure if this goes off tangent, is what we kind of produced as kind of byproduct of our competition. So we had all this human judgment data of saying this translation is better than that translation. And there's like a research approach that recently became more popular called learning from human preferences. So, and that is exactly the preference data that is needed. So we actually also train on these human judgments. So just having the human judgment that this is a better translation than that can be used as a signal to improve the machine translation model. Yeah, so as I said from the outset, when I talked about hype, I'm not here to promise that machine translation is going to replace all professional translators and will overtake them, because I don't think so. But it is basically, it's kind of the task for a translator today is to figure out how to use all these tools to be, more productive, to be, better and kind of have better fluent output and all that. And it's especially interesting now with the large language model wave, because there's so many different ways you can use them, but how to use them then efficiently so you don't like spend like half an hour on one sentence and spending all the time prompt engineering. That might not be the right way to do. So there's probably something coming in the future. Maybe some translator should come up with a good tool that actually makes life easier for them.
Yeah, for everybody.
Yeah. I always feel like that someone who's actually using a tool is probably the best person to build the tool.
Yep. Thank you. Second question, Abir Sabri, please.
Thank you very much, Si Mohammed. Good evening or good afternoon, Professor Koehn. Thank you for your very insightful presentation. So reflecting on your experience with the Moses system and the evolution from phrase-based statistical methods to neural machine translation, what key lessons have you learned that could inform the development of future translation models, especially regarding the balance between linguistic knowledge and data-driven approaches?
So there's a lot lessons learned, like having it as open source was very beneficial. That basically get as many people engaged in improving the systems, which is actually currently also what happens with the large language models. Actually surprising that you could actually build ChatGPT in your room if you wanted to, if you have big enough computers. But because the software is available, the training data is available. So we're actually kind of in a nice environment where all this is very open, and that's kind of what established also with like Moses and all that. You asked about linguistic information. So in statistical machine translation, we kind of made our way back to linguistics. So for several language pairs, the best systems were actually systems that built syntactic structures. So they built parse trees and discovered noun phrases and verb phrases and all that. And that was better than the kind of baseline statistical machine translation system, which didn't really care about linguistics that much. But nowadays with neural machine translation, like anybody who tried to improve them with more linguistic kind of constraints or insights or structures, they all failed, and nobody's even seriously trying it anymore. So that's kind of the bad news. Knowing anything about language doesn't seem to matter. So I'm always joking that they don't even believe in words anymore. So they kind of chop up words into subwords. It's just byte streams. There's byte streams coming in, byte streams coming out. It could be anything. I don't care what it is. And that's kind of really what it is. So if you build a machine translation model, whatever language pair we're going to throw in, we do exactly the same thing. We might care a bit about how much training data there is, but we don't care if it's a morphologically rich language. We don't care if it makes spaces between words. If it uses Chinese characters, we're like 20,000 character set, or use Arabic or Latin script language with, or like things with Arabic, where vowels may or may not be written, and all these we don't necessarily care that much. We just throw the data in and it works.
Chinese.
Yeah, and any effort to do anything better hasn't really worked out for neural MT.
Thank you, Professor. We move on quickly to the next question. Hafsa Qardal.
Hello, sir. It's a great to have you with us today, and thanks for leading today's session and for sharing your knowledge. Actually, my question goes, first, I want to mention that a long time ago, I've read a book review of your book, Neural Machine Translation, and that review was done by Andrew Jost from Cambridge University. And it was mentioned in that review that in the second chapter of that book, MT currently doesn't aim to provide perfect translation, but rather to offer an overview of what like a given piece of content is about, rather than having it perfectly translated. In cases when high quality translations is required, where professional translators are needed, and this is where post-edition comes into play. On the other hand, some futurists and AI experts like Ray Kurzweil, he introduces the concept of singularity. I mean, AI and MT tool will become so advanced that they can improve themselves without human help. And by 2045, exactly, it might be able to surpass human capabilities in many areas. So my question goes is that, and the question that actually puzzles us all as students of translation and remained unanswered is, can the word completely abandon the role of human in translation and completely rely on a machine someday in the future?
Yeah, so I'm generally still skeptical about it. Because machines still make mistakes, and if you have a human then review it, you're able to catch them. Yes, there are various attempts to kind of automatically do quality assurance and all that, but that's why I said the mantra is always, you want machine translation to be good enough for a certain purpose, but if you want to do for it to be as good as possible, you need to have a translator in the loop of that process. I think there is also the commercial world of how much are people willing to pay for, good translations, and what is good enough for them. And are they happy with machine translation? And then that's 10 times cheaper. They just do that and they put it on the web page, machine translation output. Again, it depends a lot on the customer. On the other hand, if machine translation makes translators more productive and they can translate twice as much, that also means that then, translation becomes cheaper, and then it also broadens the market of people who might want to get stuff translated. There's like a really large amount of stuff that could be translated. It's just always what is economically feasible to be translated. And if translation gets cheaper due to like higher productivity in the technology, it might actually increase the market for stuff that needs to be translated. I mean, just to give you one concrete example that I actually know from a translation agency, so they were talking to a producer of, this is now spoken language translation only, but not necessarily, a producer of like a German soap opera that's been running for 20 years, and they have a show out coming every day. And they want to sell that over abroad, and therefore it needs to be translated. But it's such a kind of commodity product that they're not going to get much money for it. So it's definitely currently by their calculus, if they would have it professionally translated, they wouldn't make their money back by selling the licenses. But if translation would, become more efficient, and have higher productivity, translators that maybe only fix every second sentence and things like that, then it might be commercially viable to do that. So there's like a vast amount of stuff that could be translated, and if things get more efficient, that decision to translate something might increase. But this is I don't know what the future of the business is. It seems to be for a long time pretty stable, that although the volume of translated material increased, and overall prices went down, there still seemed to be more or less the same amount of translators being hired and being employed to do the translation. I don't know the latest industry numbers. You might know them better than I do then. Yeah, but I'm not promising that it's going to be solved in 2024 and 2045. Although 2045 is a long way out. Yeah, so yeah, if this is a career advice question, I think that my career advice would be to kind of really get familiar with the tools that are out there. So you should be familiar with, like, can you use ChatGPT to improve your translations? To the point of, here's a translation I produced. I don't quite like it because it doesn't sound right. Ask it to rewrite it. Maybe then that's a better translation. Oh, I don't know exactly what
thank you.
What would make your life easier?
Yeah. Next, Mrabih Lhadi.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so well, the answer from the kind of research community is just provide us data. I mean, that's kind of a big challenge, especially for dialects. So I know a little bit about like Arabic, Moroccan dialect and all that, how it's written, and is it really written? And do you mainly write Modern Standard Arabic, or do you sneak in some words that are Moroccan dialect? But you're not gonna literally gonna type up the way you've spoken, because that's, nobody would be able to read that, because that's not how typically things are written. So it's a bit of a, yeah. So so that but it does pop up a lot in like social media. So if you look probably at social media posting in Morocco, people write much more in the spirit of their dialect than sticking to the formal language. And that is really hard to translate, because that data doesn't really exist, and people have real trouble with that. And there's definitely some methods of being more robust to kind of, yeah, I don't want to call it noisy input, but yeah, non-standard input. But ultimately, we need to have examples of this kind of text and figure out what it means.
Yep.
So it's both like, can you come up with smarter methods that are robust to language variety more than they currently are, and a mix of kind of just getting enough data in that form.
Yeah, thank you. Last question, Samira Taibi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Koehn, for this insightful and enlightening presentation about machine translation. My question is in which way can machine translation help in translating from one language to another? And is it easier to translate using AI, considering machines can't always be right? Thank you.
Yeah, so it is, as I said, it's kind of, you have to figure out how to use the tool. And the nice thing with like kind of the AI large language models is that you could also add something to the translation question, like please use certain terminology or use certain style when you translate something, or here's the context where the sentence was being said, and translate with that context. So there's, it really comes down to kind of the user to figure out how do you use the tools right now. So the current
Thank you so much.
Of you just getting machine translation output from someone and you then have to fix it is not the ideal setup.
So shall we add one more question?
Sure.
Nasruddin Azuzi. Nasruddin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for this presentation, Mr. Koehn. It's very insightful, and it intrigues my appetite to dig deep and try to learn more about this field of AI translation and these new tools that we have. Now, during your presentation, you spoke about attention mechanism, in which the AI tool detects the context from the wording close to the term that we want to translate. Now here, can we see like predict that such tool can somehow generate or learn about cultural practices and cultural differences and generate versions based on that knowledge that collected from corpses around the world? And my second question will be related to speech. Now you mentioned that to translate a speech is really difficult because of tonality, we have stops, and we have now. How can we, as an MA student in translation, that how can we like dig deep in this field and try to find ways in order to provide a pathway in order to create a mechanism that can translate speech accurately and in a live situation? And thank you so much for.
Yeah, so the first question was about cultural context and having the right way of phrasing things. Yeah, so that is, I mean, we all rely on the data that the models are trained on, so they will capture quite a lot of that already. Like which word choices can, like, I mean, there are particular words that are offensive in one language, but their translation might not be, or the other way around, and that is already reflected in the training data for machine translation. But yeah, when it comes to like specific cultural scenarios, I mean, it might be that language models can do that to some degree, where you say that this is in a formal context. So I mean, a typical example, for instance, is in German. In English, you always say you to everybody, but in German, you make a distinction between the polite you that you kind of use to official people that you meet in a professional context, and your friends, you use a different word for you. And these kind of nuances, since they're not in the source language, they kind of have to be added somehow in the translation. And if it doesn't have the context, it just goes with what is seen most of the time. So it may be always used the more formal way, but then if you translate like social media text, having a formal translation there is actually really wrong and confusing. So maybe by having in the prompt of a large language model, you can provide all this context, and then it does the right thing. So maybe that is successful. Yeah, how to learn more about and how this works. I mean, there's a lot of tools out there to use. So like you can go and check ChatGPT does and so on. That's kind of the first kind of get familiar with how good is it actually. So if you actually try out how good is the technology for Moroccan Arabic, you're probably the best judge for that. I mean, after that, you kind of need access to computers, and you can actually download a lot of the models. So a lot of these large models that are being trained, or at least a good subset of them, are publicly available. So for speech translation, for instance, there's a model called Whisper from OpenAI that they released. You can actually download it and try it yourself, but you need a kind of non-trivial technical expertise to get that to run. And
Thank you.
You need a computer with GPU and all that. Yeah, in terms of like, this is such a fast-moving field. There is just too much happening right now, so there's not kind of like here's the grand textbook you should read and it has up-to-date information. We're not there. So yeah, if I say read the latest research papers, that's probably not a good idea, but yeah, it's very much open out in the world right now. So kind of,
yes, thank you. Professor Bilbesha. Professor? Professor Gulbasha? Okay. So, Mr. Dr. Philipp Koehn, on behalf of the Translation Culture and Digital MA program in Morocco, Nador to be precise, in the northern part of Morocco, we thank you so much. We are so grateful for the opportunity to learn from your expertise in the field of translation, machine translation industry. And we tend to thank you so much for such an enlightening and engaging lecture. So we hope to have you for another session in the future, if possible. So we are so thankful. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation. So on behalf of the students and everybody attending this session today, we thank you so much. This marks the end of our today's lecture. If you have any more insights or remarks to add, yes, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always good to hear from, especially an audience I typically don't talk to. So.
Yes, behind the screens. Okay.
Yeah. Really interesting to hear. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for good questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're very welcome anytime. So we'll keep in touch for any future events. You can invite us to attend your online sessions if there are some. Any. So thank you so much. So if there are no more questions, there are some other questions, but we don't have time. Maybe another time. So thank you so much, everybody. This marks the end of our session for today. And have a great evening. Is it the evening, Mr.?
No, it's just not even noon yet. It's like
yes,
hours earlier.
United States, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, and see you another time.
Okay, great. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you.